بسم الله. أستاذ أحمد. Good to go. لم يظهر إلا نورك. طيب. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is an echo, right?
Sounds like a little echoey.
Sounds like a little echo?
Yeah, Shaykh
طب
Osamah.
Alhamdulillah. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless this return to the Friday Forum and to bless this hour that we have in dhikr and remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal. This hour that we have in discussion and reflection about critical things relating to our deen, our lives, our practice, our relationships, our connection with the Prophet ﷺ. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to always make us of those who have a meaningful connection with good things, with the house of Allah and with the teachings of the Quran and the teachings of the Sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's been a while since we had this Friday Forum. We took a pause, took a break because we knew that the end of the summer people are busy with doing different things, traveling, spending time with family. And the beginning of the school year, whether you're in college, most of you probably are, or if you're older and you have kids, getting them started off in school. So the idea is we wanted people to be able to settle down in their routine and then start back up again with everything for this fall semester, inshallah. So I pray that you find these Friday forums every Friday fulfilling. And what better way to start than with our beloved Prophet ﷺ. I guess the thought behind starting with this topic, building meaningful love for the Prophet ﷺ, was especially timely because we're at the very beginning of Rabi' al-Awwal. It's supposed to be starting this weekend, and it's a very special season. We're going to talk about it during the talk, inshallah. But as I usually start off with a little dua. It's good to make dua. Always good to make dua, especially when we're facing difficult things. And something that should be weighing on us right now is what's happening in Morocco and what's happening in Libya. I spoke about this earlier in the khutbah today. Even if you're not Moroccan, even if you're not Libyan, this sense of feeling the plight of others is a really, really important factor in Iman. It's a sign that Iman's alive in the heart. I should really care when I hear someone going through a tragedy. I should really try to do something. Even if the only thing I could do is make dua. That's a critical part of the Muslim mindset. This universality in thought, that my brother is the one that's right next to me and the one on the other side of the world. They're both my brother. And I equally feel pain when they feel pain. So the Prophet ﷺ teaches us to being like a structure. It's very, very tragic how many of you have taken time to actually look into what's going on in Libya and in Morocco, just by a show of hands? How many of you tried to watch videos, read articles? Raise your hand high, right? A good number of you, mashallah. If you haven't, take the time to do it. I know no one likes to see dead bodies. It's not like a fun thing to see. You don't need to necessarily look for that type of thing. But to actually see with your eyes, the difficulties they're going through. You see a building collapsing, seeing the violent, waters as they're going through the city, or the earthquake when it happened. It's important for it to register within me because, we're a creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in a way that things register within us at different levels, right? When I understand something, it registers in a certain way. But when I see it, it registers in a different way. In a stronger way, a more impactful. I just saw it in front of my eyes, right? If I hear about someone dying in a tragic way, I'll feel bad, right? If I see it happen in front of my eyes, I'll never forget it, right? Can someone please close this door, please? Jazakumullah khair. Hear a lot of noise coming out of there. So if I see it happening in front of my eyes, I will never forget it. If I'm there to actually experience it, it's going to change my life forever. If I'm there to experience it. So I need to be aware of this. Because part of the tragedy is not just a natural tragedy. Right? This is really, really important to understand this. It is not just a natural tragedy, like natural phenomena happening. It is also a human tragedy perpetrated by a lot of irresponsibility, a lot of corruption. That's part of what's contributing to these realities. The fact that there's no infrastructure to make sure that people can live safely. The fact that there's no care or concern to make sure that the best service is provided for those. I said something in the khutbah. I know this is not really our topic, but I think it's important to say it. What happened when a submarine imploded at the bottom of the ocean as it was trying to get to the Titanic? Countries, I'm not joking. It wasn't like one country with a few ships. Countries of the world with massive ships, helicopters, planes, converged upon the area searching for the submarine because what? We're talking about billionaires. Allahu Akbar. I kid you not, ask the brothers who have family back home, there are towns in Morocco on top of some remote mountain that were just left to die slowly away. The people who died immediately, and then the people who died slowly under the rubble because no one could get to them in time to save them. That's tragic. Wallahi, it's tragic. It needs to invigorate something in my heart. So let's start with dua. اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت سبحانك كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم صل وسلم على حبيبك وعبدك المختار سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. O Allah, we call upon you, we pray to you, beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes to bless us with guidance, to fill our hearts with the nur of guidance. O Allah, fill our homes with the nur of guidance. Make us steadfast upon Iman. Make us and our children and our families steadfast upon La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah until we meet you and you're pleased with us. We ask you, Allah, to better our lives and our livelihood and to make the best of our actions, the last of our actions, the best of our days, the last of our days, the best of all days, the day we meet you and you're pleased with us. O Allah, we ask you to be with our brothers and sisters in Morocco and Libya and in Turkey and in Egypt and in Yemen and in Iraq and in Kashmir and our Uyghur brothers and sisters. We ask you, Allah, to be with our brothers and sisters in parts of Africa, all parts of the world that are facing affliction, bala, trials, difficulties. Allah, we ask you to accept those who died in the earthquake and those who died of drowning among the shuhada. Oh Allah, we ask you to accept them from among the shuhada. Oh Allah, accept them from among the shuhada. Oh Allah, we ask you to bring ease to their families. Oh Allah, those who are still alive but were injured, we ask you, Allah, to give them healing. Give them healing. Give shifa and afiyah to every injured and wounded person from the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask you, Allah, on this blessed night, in this blessed space, in this blessed gathering, to better the condition of the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the east and west. Oh Allah, make us a people who care about the condition of the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Oh Allah, make us of those who embody prophetic empathy towards others. Oh Allah, make us of those who embody prophetic empathy towards others. Oh Allah, we ask you, Allah, we ask you, Allah, to help us follow in the footsteps of our beloved Prophet ﷺ with hearts full of compassion, with hearts full of patience, with hearts full of wisdom, with hearts full of good character and understanding. We ask you, Allah, to help us build a meaningful connection with our beloved Prophet ﷺ, meaningful love for him. We ask you, Allah, to help us connect with his seerah and to help us connect with his legacy. We ask you, Allah, to make us good followers, dutiful followers of our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to make us of those who are near to him on the day of judgment. We ask you, Allah, to make the last words that we say when we leave this dunya, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Oh Allah, we ask you to allow us to die upon it, resurrect us upon it, and gather us upon the fountain of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and bless us to drink from his palms a drink that will never feel thirst thereafter. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. As we usually start, I'm going to pass it over to Akhi Ibrahim to share with you guys a few things about tonight and about what's coming in the coming days, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just a quick announcement, or if you have a few announcements actually. First of all, it's beautiful to see everyone. Barakallahu feekum for coming to our inaugural Friday Forum. Inshallah, we'll see you for many more. We are going to launch our fall semester now. So we're going to have many classes, inshallah, throughout the week. That'll begin starting today into Sunday, into Tuesday. So inshallah, our first class will be our Sira class, and first semester will just be the Meccan period. Now, this is very important because it's Rabi' al-Awwal, and we were able to match it at the same time as the Mawlid, at the same time of the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. So it is going to be a perfect time, perfect time to learn about the Prophet ﷺ, understand the Prophet ﷺ, and today, inshallah, we'll introduce why that's important. How do we know more about the Prophet ﷺ? How do we connect more with him? Alayhi salatu wasalam, and why is it important? So that's the first class that we have. That'll be starting, inshallah, at 7 p.m. The next class that we have will be fiqh of salah. So all things in relation to salah, wudu, niyyas, what is salah, how do I make it properly? Following, I believe it would be the Shafi'i madhab, correct? Or just more general?
No, it'll be based on the Shafi'i school, and when needed, we'll mention other opinions.
Inshallah ta'ala. That'll be on Tuesdays. So that'll replace the tafsir class. We'll be having the fiqh of salah class. That'll be 7:30 on Tuesdays. I'm reading this right off the email, so if any of you are subscribed to the email, you'll be able to see that. And on top of that, you can find it on our social media pages. They'll be sending that weekly, inshallah. Now, the next event that we have will be My Journey in Islam. Now, this is a social event. It's a special event for converts, reverts, people that are new to Islam. And that will kick off or re-kick off our event or our talk that we used to have, our class for the converts, reverts, and the basics of Islam course. For anyone that's new to Islam, anyone that's newly practicing, they attend this course. It's a weekly course. And the first one will be Sunday, September 24th. So not this Sunday, but the next Sunday, between 1:30 and 4:30, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Now, inshallah, for Friday Forum, we will be beginning at 8:30 today, but we'll be following Isha. So we'll be pulling back every week or so, every week about 10 minutes until we reach 7:30. So class will probably start around 8 o'clock regularly. And with that, as you all know, if you're new here, we have the Slido. It's just a QR code. You could scan it with your phone. You can put in the code. And then any question you have related to this, please keep it relevant and respectful. You can ask it on the Slido. If you don't have a question, but you see a question that you like, you can like that question and bring it up to the top. We'll be going to the questions that are most relevant, as well as the questions that are more highly liked. And for this discussion, we can go anywhere. This is a big topic. So if you have any specific angles that you want to get into after Shaykhna gets into the introduction, then we can go there. We want this to be a fluid conversation. If you have a question, you don't want to put it up there, you want me to ask it right away, just raise your hand and then you'll cut the line. So keep that in mind. Barakallah feekum. With that, Shaykhna, where do we begin? Tfaddal.
Barakallah feek. Allah yakramak, Shaykh. Sorry, just to emphasize one thing, for the courses, we're actually going over books. So for the Sunday course, the book we're going over is Revelation, the story of Muhammad. It's by Mi'raj Muhyiddin. It's a really good book, very well elaborated, a lot of details, a lot of pictures, figures and stuff like that. Clarifies things in a really good way. If you didn't register for it, you can. It's a free registration. Just make sure you register so we know how many books to get. And then the other one is going to be on Tuesday. The other book is the Accessible Conspectus. The books are going to be available at the class time, inshallah ta'ala. And then the September 24 class, the September 24 session, by the way, tell new Muslims about it, or even people who've converted a while back. It's basically conversion stories. That's what they're going to share. It's going to be a good time for people to connect with each other, and it's going to be at 1:30. It's going to be served with food, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So, speaking about the Prophet ﷺ, building meaningful love. I was sharing with Akhi Ibrahim before we started today, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the prophets, alayhim as-salam, the doorways to Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is something really important to reflect on when it comes to understanding our human psychology. How we operate as human beings and how we understand things and perceive things. Allah has made human beings the carriers of the message, and they are the doorways to Allah, meaning that they're the ones who connect us with Allah. Just as you and I represent Islam in our own little capacity, the Prophet ﷺ symbolizes human perfection, or symbolizes the best of what human beings can become. And, being that doorway, if you look at the Prophet ﷺ's life, and his seerah, it's a story about people falling into the orbit of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's basically what it is. They fell into his orbit, and they learned about him, and they fell in love with him. And when they fell in love with him, they fell in love with Islam, with Allah, with the truth, with the Quran. That's the bottom line. You know, this human emotion of love, you know, is described. One of the scholars, he says a beautiful, beautiful thing that teaches us about humanity. إن النفوس قد جبلت على حب من أحسن إليها وبغض من أساء إليها. Human beings, however complex they are, there's this simple reality that people are attracted to those who bring with them a lot of goodness, people of excellence, people of benevolence, people of positivity. People are attracted to that. It's very contagious. When you find someone who is selfless, you get attracted to them. When you find someone who you believe is at their core sincere, it attracts you to them. The Prophet ﷺ was all that and more. That's really what it is. You know, the Prophet, why love the Prophet ﷺ? Yeah, sure, I could give you an easy reason. That he's the carrier of the message. And that's a great reason to love him. Absolutely, he's the carrier of the message. But besides that, the carrier of this message, Allah made him have the most beautiful soul you could possibly imagine. And because he had such a beautiful soul, people loved him. You know, this is, you know, the other part of this statement, you know, is naturally people will be disinclined from people who are wicked, people who are, you know, toxic, people who are injurious, people who bring them harm. This is the basics of our humanity. So, you know, it's really, really important to understand that part of building this meaningful love for the Prophet ﷺ is to orient ourselves in the same way. Well, of course, we'll never reach his status, but to orient ourselves in a very beautiful way. That's what it means to be a true follower of Muhammad ﷺ. How can I become? Basically, the question another way is, how can I become a beautiful person? Well, let me look at the different facets of his life. How was he in public and how was he in private? How was he with his friends and how was he with his foes? How was he with his family and how was he with his friends? How was he with just the average person, the people, the higher class people, so to say, the lower class people, the laymen, the common folk? How was he with them? And when you look at and assess these different aspects of the Prophet ﷺ's life, you see a certain consistency. And this consistency, you know, anyone whose fitrah is where it's supposed to be, will absolutely fall in love with this consistency that the Prophet ﷺ had. You know, when I think of consistency, Akhi Ibrahim, there's another prophet, that Allah highlights his consistency in different realities of his life in the Quran. You guys know who I may be thinking of? Who do you think I'm thinking of? There's another prophet. This idea of consistency in varying circumstances is a common thread throughout his life. Who do you think it is? Yusuf alayhi salam. That's who it is. That's who it is. Yusuf alayhi salam. And you know what? This is actually, there's parallels drawn between the life of Yusuf alayhi salam and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why this surah was revealed in Mecca, by the way. Believe it or not. There's subtle messages in the surah to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, but still with the ups and downs, again, you know, to find someone who's able to maintain the same mindset when he is absolutely weak and then when he's absolutely powerful, that is very unique. Very unique. To find someone to have the same mindset with people who are good to him and then people who are utterly wicked with him, that's tough to find, right? Ibrahim's very good to me, so it's easy for me to be good back, right? But what happens when I'm dealing with the absolute opposite? If I'm dealing with someone who is just so hurtful and injurious to me, what does the Prophet ﷺ teach us in that regard? You know, there's a beautiful verse in the Quran This verse highlights why it's important to build meaningful love with the Prophet ﷺ. This verse is in Surah Al-Mu'minun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ لَمْ يَعْرِفُوا رَسُولَهُمْ فَهُمْ لَهُ مُنْكِرُونَ. The Quran says, أَمْ لَمْ يَعْرِفُوا. This here, أَمْ بِمَعْنَى بَلْ. The reality is, when you don't know him, you will reject him, right? Because if you knew him, you will utterly love him, and when you utterly love him, you will follow him. That's what it is. The Quran says it to us. What's the defining factor in someone's willful commitment to the religion and his rejection of it? You know what the defining factor is? Knowing the Prophet ﷺ. Knowing the Prophet ﷺ. If I don't know the Prophet ﷺ, I will not be as motivated to do good things, right? That's why they say, you know what they say? If you want your iman to mature, where do you go? Where do you go? The best way to make sure your iman matures is by learning about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Because when it's a whole bunch of concepts and ideas, guess what? You know, it doesn't resonate as well. It's not going to be reflected as well in who we become. Well, what does this mean? When does it become a bunch of concepts and ideas? When religiosity, quote unquote, becomes halal and haram, and it's divorced from a certain lifestyle, then guess what? Person's going to become very polarized in their behaviors. Very polarized, right? He's going to become the haram police, right? He's going to be, banging on people's heads. You're not good. You need to do this, that, so on and so on. And they're going to be very zealous in their practice. But the more that it becomes part of a life, the learning about the Prophet ﷺ helps our iman become a lifestyle. That's what it is. You get that? Lifestyle. It's critical. Lifestyle change. Every facet of our lives. If you want your iman to be meaningful, then you need to learn about the Prophet ﷺ from a few different angles. You need to learn about his seerah. You need to learn about his shama'il. His shama'il refer to his features, physical features, and his characteristics, his khuluq, his character. And I also need to become a person who has an affinity with remembering him. Right? There's this thing about, what's at the top of your mind right now? Don't tell me. Don't tell me what's at the top of your mind. I don't want to know what's on everyone's mind right now. For some people, it might be, what am I going to do right after this? For other people, it might be, when am I going to go to sleep tonight? For other people, it might be, Allahu Alam, endless possibilities. But anyway, what's at the top of your mind right now? What's at the top of your mind most of the time? You know what's that going to tell me? You know what's that going to tell you? What's at the top of my mind? It's going to tell us what really matters. Who am I as a person? What do I think about? What consumes my thought? That's going to tell me who I am as a person. If my thought is consumed by utterly useless things, then guess what? I'm going to become a useless person. That's basically what it is, right? What's at the top of my mind? That's why dhikr is important. You know dhikr, the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal. This whole idea of dhikr, remember Allah when you wake up, and remember Allah before sunset, and remember Allah when you go to sleep, and remember Allah before salah, right, the sunnah. Remember Allah after salah, right? Remember Allah when you eat. Remember Allah when you do everything. Remember the Prophet ﷺ. The more you do these types of things, I have an affinity with remembering Allah Azza wa Jal. It helps shape who I become as a person. That's why dhikr is important. That's why remembering the Prophet ﷺ is also important. By the way, this whole idea of, this is Rabi' al-Awwal, right? So, we're entering into this blessed month that reminds us of certain realities about our Prophet ﷺ, his life, his death, and his legacy in general. Is that something that's exclusive to this month? Of course not. No, of course not. There are people who make it a habit on a weekly basis to have a gathering to remember the Prophet ﷺ. The more I'm able to connect with him, the more I will be elevated as a person. I'm going to get more into this, inshallah. I don't know. By the way, if you guys have questions, please ask. I want to engage on different things. I know not everything is as easy as to digest as the spiritual aspects of it. You have tough questions, you want to ask something that doesn't make sense to you, you want to voice something, use the Slido. We'll take those questions as they're coming in. But just remember this, there's something more to dhikr. Remember this, maybe you've never looked at it this way. What does dhikr help me do? It helps me shape my mindset, because I am what most of my time is consumed thinking about, right? That's what dhikr does. Do we have anything coming in?
Yeah, we have a few good questions. The first one I'm going to have to skip for now. If we have time, maybe we'll get into it.
Please don't tell me it's about marriage.
No, there are things that are subtweeting, but not direct yet. Can you? Where is it? What's the best way to build a mental perception of the Prophet ﷺ and what he would do? I'd like to answer the question: what would the Prophet ﷺ do?
What would the Prophet ﷺ do concerning what?
As in, how do I frame myself to always be able to think and answer that question? How do I build a mental perception of the Prophet?
Well, obviously the first part of this is building a general awareness of his life. Look, the same thing we say with the whole idea of the Quran being in your heart. If I don't really read the Quran and I don't know its general concepts and ideas, then guess what? The first thing that's going to come to my mind when I'm in the middle of the problem, is it going to be a verse of the Quran? Is it going to be a Quranic? No, it's not. Because very little of my time is actually spent reading the book. You are what you dedicate your time to, right? You are what you dedicate your thought to, right? So the first part of this is actually building a base of knowledge that I could draw from, immediately. It's not something that, we're just programmed to have. We're not born with this. I need to build it. I need to cultivate it. إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ, right? Knowledge is by exerting myself and doing that, right? It's not just like, it'd be cool if I could just plug a USB somewhere right here and just download a kilobyte of useful stuff into my brain. It's not the way it works, right? Maybe one day Elon Musk will figure it out for us, but well, I don't know if I'd want to even try that. But anyway, the point here is, I need to build a base of awareness. That's why فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. There's this element of knowledge that's critical in my journey to Allah. If I really want to meaningfully be able to think of religious things, I need to have a base of knowledge I draw from. And that's going to immediately come to my mind when I need it. That's step one. The other thing is, I need to be able to decipher different things, right? I need to be able to decipher different things about the Prophet ﷺ. This is not something that you could just go to a book and open up and is going to give you all the answers to. But it needs some thought and reflection, all right? And it's part of it is common sense, but we need to, without reflection, it won't become clear, right? Is there any merit to understanding these different situations the Prophet ﷺ was put in? The Prophet ﷺ was put in situations of great hardship, and he was put in situations of ease. There's a wisdom behind that. His life wasn't all affliction, but he was exposed to different realities, very different realities. You want to know what a good response to processing loss is? Read about the Prophet ﷺ. He experienced tons of loss. What are the types of loss he experienced? He experienced the loss of his parents. He experienced the loss of his children. Every single one of them died during his lifetime, except one, except Sayyidah Fatima. She died after him 6 months, right? I want to process loss. Let me see how the Prophet ﷺ, let me see how he grieved, right? I want to see how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with those who were under his mercy. Let me look. Let me look at how he carried himself within his home. One of the marvels of the Prophet ﷺ's life is you'll see that his first followers were his family. That is just so against what you would normally think, because usually your first followers will not be your family, not because they know you. They know you, right? They know you in and out, right? People who don't know you may be more inclined to have a good impression of you if you have a good few words to say, and if you have an ability to, capture their attention, right? But on the reality of it, who knows you in and out? Your family. If you're able to actually win over your family and they are just as committed to you as people on the outside, that shows that you've achieved something extremely great. His first followers were his family. That's a marvel of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And and still, if you continue to assess the different situations, right? If I'm someone who was oppressed by another, and I want to know, how should I react? How should I react to that person who came into my life and left behind them a whole lot of destruction? They caused me so much pain. They ruined a lot of things for me. How should I deal with that? Let me look at the Prophet ﷺ, and I'll realize that actually one of the greatest catalysts to greatness was Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl. Again, it's counterintuitive. You think about growth, you're not going to really think of those who tried to ruin you. But when you think about it a little bit further, you will find that the most difficult things that you had to deal with in your life usually pose the most opportunities for growth for you, right? It's not because Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab were great people. They were awful human beings. But Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab were used to elevate the Prophet ﷺ in ways that continue to teach generations. Think about that. The next time you're complaining about person X, Y, or Z, or you're complaining about your sibling or your parent or whatever, think about that. It's not about having a perfect reality. It's having a mindset that helps you grow through all of the imperfections in your life. Right? That's what it is. Wallahu a'lam.
Barakallah feek, Shaykhna. A quick one.
He wants to ask him.
Yeah, go ahead.
Faddal Maulana. Mm-hmm. That was the question that I was going to ask. What are the resources that you can access to start downloading the data, so to say?
Come on Sunday.
Huh?
Come on Sunday.
There you go. Take a course. Study. Read the book. There's a lot of good books about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a lot of good resources, online and in person. Look, there's been this tradition in our ummah since the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us this. There's something about the human connection with good people that just does wonders in transforming you as a person. Don't underestimate this, guys. Let me say this again. There's this thing about human beings, like there's something better than downloading it, right? Right? So you being, it's one thing to read about it. It's another thing for you to learn it through real life experience. And this is one of our biggest struggles as, Muslims in this great modern era of ours, right? People are utterly disconnected. We don't have these great human relationships that we would hope. Some might have them. If you do, you're blessed. If you do, you're blessed. But from the time of what do you think is the greatest thing that transformed the companions? Let me ask you that, right? So the companions didn't need to read any book to download the data. They had a more effective way. And that is, they had a beautiful teacher that they connected with and saw with their own eyes. There was no one who was more under the microscope, so to say, than the Prophet ﷺ. When you learn about the Shama'il, it'll teach you about that. These people were so astute, they paid so much attention to who the Prophet ﷺ was, to the point that they'll tell you how his face looked when he smiled. They would say his face would light up like the moon on a full moon, the night of a full moon, Laylat al-Badr. They would even notice that much about the Prophet ﷺ. Again, this human and the sunnah actually continued. Abu Hurairah became the great person he became. Why? Right? And then what did he do with it? He had his own students. He had his own people that he connected with. And that continued generation after generation. You know what we call it? We call it suhbah. Suhbah. Companionship. of good people. There's something in our tradition, brothers and sisters, that's called Hubbu Salihin, Suhbatu Salihin. Loving the righteous, connecting with the righteous. And I shared this in the past. There's this beautiful quote from Sayyidina Luqman, from Muwatta Imam Malik. He says, يا بني جالس العلماء وزحمهم فإن الله يحيي القلوب بنور الحكمة كما يحيي الأرض بوابل السماء. A beautiful quote. He says, "O my son, sit with the scholars or sit with righteous people. Sit with mentors, sit with guides, sit with people who have a lot of life experience." That's why one of the richest ways to learn about Iman or learn about life is sit with people who've experienced a lifetime of experiences. If you have that opportunity, you know somebody who you think is righteous, who has a lot to offer, who is older in their years, 60, 70, 80, and you could actually sit with them, listen to them. They'll teach you a lot about life, right? So anyway, he says, sit with the people of knowledge because Allah revives the hearts with the light of wisdom. Look how he describes it, with the nur of wisdom. Wisdom is light, right? You'll find that the darkest pockets in people's lives is triggered by ignorance, right? The darkest pockets in people's lives are triggered by ignorance. Ignorance does a lot to ruin people's lives, right? Just the thought process and the petty things. There's la khayra fi kathirin min najwahum. Allah says it. There's no goodness in a lot of their private conversations. Although, he said, she said, he did, we did, mish'arife, we going, we not going, all this nonsense that, is this weight on our souls. It's a weight on our souls, by the way. All these conversations that are around pure ignorance, they're a weight on the soul. You lift this weight by giving the heart the nur of wisdom, right? Allah gives light to the hearts with the nur of wisdom, just as He gives life to barren land with the rain from the heavens. That's what He says. So it's a beautiful thing. So that's another thing I would say. Yeah, sure, I'll give you a bunch of books, a bunch of YouTube videos. Something bigger, figure out meaningful connections that you could have with righteous people. You have a sheikh in your locality. You could connect with Shaykh Qatanani, Shaykh Yasser. Every Thursday, the dhikr and fikr. You could connect with Shaykh Yasser, learn from him, or Shaykh Qatanani, or any other shuyukh, or you want to attend a course, or something like that. This is something that every single one of us needs, and we never stop needing it, by the way. We never stop needing it. Whether you become the most knowledgeable person, you're going to continue to ever need this. I need good voices in my life, right? Now, the other stuff, in terms of the books, one of the most books I'm impressed with is this book that we're going to study, Revelation, the story of Muhammad. I'm very impressed with it because there's a lot of details in it, and it's just laid out in a very coherent way. So that's another good book that you can invest in. There's also obviously Shaykh Yasir Qadhi's series on Seerah, very informative, a lot of information. There's different approaches to the Seerah, by the way. There's an informative approach, and then there's a spiritual approach. There is a subject-based approach. There's different approaches. So Shaykh Yasir Qadhi's approach is a very informative approach. A lot of information, pulls from different books, and it's actually been published in a book. If you guys don't have it, you could buy it from Amazon. A very good resource to have. You can have shorter books. That's a bigger book. It's pretty big. Just like Revelation is pretty big. If you want a shorter book, there's When the Moon Splits. It's another really good book. There's also Lessons from the Seerah by Dr. Bhuti. Very good book. There's another one by Sheikh Mustafa Sibai, Lessons and Reflections from the Seerah. Very good books to access. There's actually others in Arabic that focus on different aspects of the seerah, right? There are books that focus on the Prophet ﷺ in his home, as a husband, as a father, and so on and so on. There's actually this really good book. It's in Arabic only though, fortunately. It actually speaks about the Prophet ﷺ as a statesperson, right? It's called the Taratib al-Idariya by one of the great scholars of Morocco. His name is Abdul Hayy al-Kittani. 2 large volumes in Arabic, speaks about every aspect of the Prophet ﷺ's life as a statesperson, right? How he strategically planned, right? And how he dealt with different nations, and how he delegated responsibilities to certain companions, and many other things along with that. How he engaged in battle. It's another thing to study, how he engaged in battle. So there are just different approaches to seerah. There is the exhaustive, informative approach. There is the spiritual-based approach, where you focus on the character of the Prophet ﷺ or certain scenes from the life of the Prophet. And then there are other approaches along with that subject-based approach, right? And then there's, again, a lot of videos online that you could also begin accessing. But again, for me, the top answer to this would be, number 1, connect with people who remind you of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of their character, and character is contagious. Allahu Akbar. I was beginning to think we were forgotten. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Go ahead. Is there any other comment or question?
Well, I mean, that sounds like a lot of things, right?
I'm
parched. I've been talking a lot. It sounds like a lot of things, but to me, barakallah feek for summarizing it at the end, I think it's almost like a rule of osmosis. You just being here today, or me just being here today, puts me around a lot of like-minded individuals. And even if I do nothing, just by being around them, I'll absorb something. Just by sitting here, I'll absorb something.
Absolutely.
And then I go to one class, and then maybe I like it, I go to another class, and then I go from there. It can be a little daunting to take a book or 5 books or 6 books, but just starting with one small thing should get the dominoes rolling.
You know who's the worst? Who's the worst friend in the world?
No.
No? You know who's the worst friend ever? Anyone know who's the worst friend ever?
Shaitan.
Who's going to be the friends with Shaitan?
I don't know.
He's mentioned in Surah Al-Furqan. There was these 2 individuals during the lifetime of the Prophet. Just speaking to how contagious character is, right? There was these 2 individuals during the time of the Prophet. This man, he was known for his generosity. Anyway, he came to the Prophet. He said, he came back from a trip. He wanted to invite people to a feast. He invited the Prophet. Prophet said, no. The man said, no, you have to come. And he insisted upon him. And the Prophet said, only if you believe. So this man, again, we're talking about an Arab here, of those times, a Bedouin Arab or an Arab from Quraysh, nobility, honor, really big thing, right? They would give their lives for nobility and honor. That's how they were. So he's like, all right, I'll believe. You have to come. I can't, So he took his shahada and he believed. Then word spread that Fulan accepted Islam. And his friend came to him and he said to him, Asabata, have you really left the religion of your forefathers? How could you do this? So then he said, no, I only did this so that Muhammad ﷺ will accept my invitation. So you know what Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed? So he left the religion because of his friend. You know what Allah revealed? وَيَوْمَ يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ يَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سَبِيلًا. If only I followed the Prophet, if only I didn't take this person as a friend. For some people, that's the reality. Some people come in their lives and they pull them away from virtue. That's a scary thing, man. One of the things we learn about the Prophet ﷺ is how great a person could become when they're in the presence of greatness. Right? The companions became great. Why? Why were they the best generation? One simple answer. Yeah, sure, we'll get into their character and their behaviors and their sacrifices. What's the simple answer as to why the companions are so great? You know why? They were in the presence of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why they were so great. That's why no non-companion will ever be at the status of a companion, because the companions, their eyes fell on the most beautiful soul. Their eyes fell on Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why we hold them in high regard. You guys are special. You were with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's how good being in the presence of a good person could be. And this person, he'll cry, I wish I didn't take Fulan as a friend, right? يَا لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أَتَّخِذْ فُلَانًا خَلِيلًا. So that's another way to look at the Prophet ﷺ and his life and his times. That's how, so if you have someone who's bringing you down in your life, don't allow that presence to remain. You don't need someone who becomes this toxic weight on your life. Now, of course, if it's family or a critical relationship, we could talk about that. But this is one thing we learned from the Prophet ﷺ's life. It's a gem.
Barakallah feek. How specific does sunnah get? I know everything the Prophet ﷺ said and did, so would that mean talking and breathing is sunnah? Could you describe what is sunnah? What is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? How do we learn to follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ?
Okay. So what does the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ refer to? For us, look, the Quran lays it out very clearly. Because Allah wanted them to be very, Allah wanted the companions to be very fixated and focused on the Prophet ﷺ in every sense. So the Quran told them and it told us, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. He never speaks of his own whim and his own accord. Everything's part of revelation. You want to know the best? Listen to the best. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We have these people among us. There's still people among us today. Such a mutilated understanding of Islam that seek to deny and reject the Sunnah categorically. There's these people. They call themselves Qur'aniyin. I just believe in what's in the Quran, and I don't believe in anything else. Like this whole Sunnah thing and Hadith thing, very, very skeptical of it. They have a mutilated understanding of Islam. There's no way you could have any fair share of Islam without having a connection with the Prophet ﷺ. You can't. What is the Sunnah? The Sunnah are his words. The Sunnah are his actions. The Sunnah include his non-actions, his approvals. It includes everything about who he was, even how he looked. Again, like I said, there's this thing called Shama'il. We had a course with Prophetic Living, me and Shaykh Yasser, recently about Shama'il. And it's about the Prophet ﷺ's physical attributes and his character, both, right? So it includes those two. That's all the Sunnah, right? How can I go about, the other thing about Sunnah is, and I mentioned this recently, I think it was in a khatira. If you want to know if a person's heart is going towards guidance or misguidance, how can you assess that? Look at how close he emulates the Prophet ﷺ. They say one of the signs of guidance is the person wanting to become or becoming more and more like the Prophet ﷺ. In every aspect, not in just like praying 2 rak'ahs here or in every aspect. There's this beautiful book that Imam Ghazali, Abu Hamid, he wrote. It's called Bidayatul Hidayah, the beginning of guidance. You know what the book is all about? It's all about Sunan of the Prophet ﷺ's Sunnah. Allahu
Barakallah feek. This is...
We have a direct question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, Salam. Is it permissible to have Shia as friends? Okay, so this is a good question. Jazakallah khair. Look, there are different levels of friendship. There's a different circle. Every person should have this in their in the framework of their understandings, right? There are different relationships to be had, right? There's one relationship that's with family, and that's not even all the same. There are certain sacred relationships that are with those closest, parents, children, grandparents, then it extended relatives, and so on and so forth. That's with family. When you have friends, same thing. There is a da'wah friendship, right? And there is a more of an intimate connection, your inner circle, those closest to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, he says, what is it? تؤتي الملك وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك لا يتخذ المؤمنون الكافرين أولياء من دون المؤمنين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there's this thing called wilaya that believers should never take with those who have beliefs that utterly contradict theirs. And of course, the setting of, the context of these verses is with, within a reality where there was actual physical combat between these people of different faiths and beliefs during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So what does wilaya mean? Wilaya means a whole lot more than just mere acquaintances, right? Wilaya means my most intimate connection, my full trust. Who am I going to divulge that to? Who am I going to really seek to grow with, right? So the da'wah relationship could even be had with someone who's a non-Muslim, let alone a Shia. Of course you could have Shia as friends. But now how close am I going to allow this friendship to overlap with my personal growth? Drawing boundaries is not something that someone who doesn't have nuance in their thought can do. It's very difficult. I need to be able to understand and decipher where I should draw a boundary with certain friendships and certain relationships. So the da'wah relationship should be maintained in a different way. I'm going into it with a different mindset. This is the clear thing. Just so we don't digress too much. When I am dealing with a da'wah relationship, I am going with the mindset of seeking to influence, seeking to inspire, seeking to serve, right? It's not like that type of relationship where, this is my close brother that I want to grow with in my iman. I'm going to sit down with him to learn. I'm going to sit down with him to reflect. I'm going to worship with him, right? So these are the things that are going to set my boundaries. Have the relationship, but don't be so intimate to the point where you share your innermost thoughts, experiences, as though you're trying to grow with them, because this growth is going to lead you in different directions. Wallahu a'lam. Same thing with marriage. Marriage even takes us a further step. Now, is it halal for someone to get married to someone who has beliefs about God and about life that are at odds with their own beliefs? In certain circumstances, we might say yes, right? With like a guy getting married to a Christian woman. Is it advisable? Of course not. How on earth could you possibly build a life that's centered on seeking Allah's Jannah and His pleasure with someone who has principles, core principles, that utterly conflict with you? That's going to even happen with Muslims, certain Muslims, by the way, right? If you're someone who is quote unquote, religious minded or seeking to seek Allah's pleasure, and you get married to someone who has a trajectory in their life that is very different, guess what? And I've seen this happen. You're going to find that they're going to clash a lot. They will not match. If someone's really trying to seek Allah's pleasure and they get married to someone who has the very opposite, they have no boundaries, no care for, no regard for that, then you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of clashes, and ultimately they may stay married, potentially, but they will not be fulfilled by the marriage. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah, we could do a few more. Let's go maybe for 15 more minutes.
A shorter one, I just want to make sure we get to this. My father, Christian, mother, Muslim. I started to pray regularly a few months ago. Can Allah accept my dua for my father? I know a little off topic, but...
the father Christian, the mother Muslim. Can Allah Azza wa Jal accept the dua for my father?
Correct.
Inshallah. Why not? Continue to make dua for every human being while they're in this dunya. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses your father with Islam and enlightens his heart with guidance. Seek that. Yeah, why not? Try. And try your best. Make dua. Look, remember Abu Hurairah. Remember Abu Hurairah? He walked in on the Prophet ﷺ one time and he was crying. He was crying. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, "Why are you crying, O Abu Hurairah?" And so he complained to the Prophet that his mother was saying bad things about the Prophet ﷺ, and she wasn't a believer. And it broke his heart. So he asked the Prophet, "Please make dua for my mother. Make the dua for my mother that Allah opens her heart to Islam." So the Prophet ﷺ made dua for her, and the Prophet's prayers were answered. So he went back home and he spoke to his mother, and his mother had a change of heart and she accepted Islam by the barakah of the dua of the Prophet. May Allah be with every son and daughter who has to deal with that type of reality where they want their parents to be guided but they're not. So try your best. Make dua. You never know. Maybe Allah will change their heart by the blessings of your dua.
Barakallah feek, Shaykhna. Can you speak?
There's a question over there.
Okay.
Okay. Why is the Prophet ﷺ regarded higher than the other prophets and messengers? ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. Look, the Prophet ﷺ teaches us to show high regard to all the prophets and messengers, right? But when it comes to who's better, well, why is one person, at a higher level than another? This person chose to do more work, sacrificed more, did more service, But again, our business is not really to compare. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, don't compare, right? How is this going to put you forth or put you back? So if I was you, I would redirect the questioner. Why is the Prophet better than other prophets? I would say, well, you know what? The better and more effective thing to think about is, how can I learn from their greatness and become a better person myself? Because don't forget, you're talking about people who died many, many years ago. They passed away. Learn from their legacy and try to become a good person yourself. That's the more meaningful question, So that's what I would say to them. Don't get caught into what he's asking. Try to push him to think in a more practical way, all right?
Barakallah feek. Okay.
Any other direct questions? There's one over there. Yeah. Yes. What's the? What's the hadith or the proof for it that you can't make dua for someone who passed away as a non-Muslim? So there's a few. This is something that's in our tradition. It's categorical. First off, when someone passes away, their book of amal is cut off. It's done, right? Now they're at the mercy of Allah. If they passed away as a Muslim, I can continue to make dua for them. If they did not, or I don't know that they did, then I leave their matter to Allah. Allah is better and more merciful, and He'll deal with them as He sees fit. In the Quran, Allah says that it's unbecoming and unbefitting for the Prophet ﷺ and the believers to seek forgiveness for the polytheists, even if they are relatives, after it's become evident to them that they're from the people of hellfire. All right, well, what does that mean? So, do I know who's going to be in hellfire or not? No, I don't. I can't say unless Allah tells me, or unless the Prophet ﷺ tells me. I don't know individuals, who is in hellfire and who's not. I don't know. I have criteria. So what is this verse talking about? It's not only speaking to the Prophet ﷺ, by the way. It's speaking to the believers. The Prophet gets revelation. Believers don't. But this rule applies to both. So what is this verse telling us to think about? It's telling us to think about the criteria. Because it's already a given, I won't know who are the individuals in hellfire and who are the individuals in Jannah. It's already known. That's a given. That's obvious, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he knows through revelation. All right, what about the believers? Why not seek forgiveness? What is it telling me to focus on? Criteria. If the criteria of making dua and seeking forgiveness for is not met, and that's Islam, then I can't make dua for them. So this is basically speaking to us about ahkam ad-dunya. You know, if the person didn't die as a Muslim, then at least to my knowledge, it discounts them from entering Jannah. But their ultimate affair is left to Allah, but can't make dua for them. Then there's other evidences from hadith that aid this. You guys know Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul? He was a munafiq. And of course, nifaq, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, was different than nifaq today. Nifaq, and those times, people would not be Muslim at heart. They would say they're Muslim. Nifaq i'tiqad, that's what we call it. He would say he's Muslim, but he wasn't. He wasn't a Muslim. He only said he was Muslim to weaken the believers from within. Okay? What do you do about someone like that? What do you do about someone like that? The Prophet sought forgiveness for him until Allah Azza wa Jal prohibited him from doing that. Right? He was prohibited from seeking forgiveness for Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. And Allah told him, استغفر لهم أو لا تستغفر لهم. إن تستغفر لهم 70 مرة فلن يغفر الله لهم. Allah won't forgive them. And then after that, he was no longer allowed to pray. And he was no longer... So if this is about the munafiqeen, what do you think it applies to? Who do you think it applies to? It applies to all of them. It applies to all of them categorically. And there's other evidences besides that. So Allah, that's the answer to this question.
Barakallahu feek, Shaykhna. We have a few more minutes left, so maybe last question here.
Sure.
Can you talk about the type of husband the Prophet ﷺ was and his mannerisms towards his wives?
The type of husband the Prophet ﷺ was and the manner, that's a big subject. You can have a lecture about that. But in general, the Prophet ﷺ was very lenient, very down to earth. The Prophet ﷺ would give his wives the space to express themselves. There was this interesting situation from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu came to visit the Prophet ﷺ. And he heard shouting from behind the door. And he heard the voice of his daughter. He got enraged and infuriated. How could she raise her voice at the Prophet ﷺ? So he came in and he made his way towards her and he wanted to hurt her. The Prophet ﷺ stood in his way and she sought protection from the Prophet. She sought protection in the Prophet ﷺ from her father. So Abu Bakr got very bothered and he left. And he came back a few days later and he found them together and in a very peaceful state. So he sat between them and he said, "Adkhilani fi silmikuma kama adkhaltumani fi harbikuma." Let me be part of this beautiful gathering that you have right now, just as I was part of your war the other day, right? Kama adkhaltumani fi harbikuma. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ, imagine, that's the Prophet. And even though he got into those types of situations with Sayyidah Aisha, she knew better than, she knew that the safest place from her father was in her husband, the Prophet ﷺ. That shows you who he was. That shows you how she trusted him, right? The Prophet ﷺ, again, there's so many beautiful aspects. It's a guide for every husband, and it's a guide for even every wife as well. The Prophet ﷺ's example applies for both. Prophet ﷺ was down to earth. He would give them each their time. He would actually also consult them and get their opinions. One clear example from the seerah is in the life of Salama. Salama was the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. She was with the Prophet ﷺ in the Umrah that they were not able to fulfill, right? They were on their way to Mecca and they were cut off by the mushrikeen. They did not allow them to go forward, right? And anyway, long story short, they needed to end their ihram. They could not continue because they were not allowed to. But the companions were very disheartened because the Prophet ﷺ had seen a dream that they're going to do Umrah, right? لَقَدْ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ رَسُولَهُ الرُّؤْيَا بِالْحَقِّ. He saw a dream that they were doing Umrah. أَلَا تَدْخُلُنَّ الْمَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامَ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ آمِنِينَ مُحَلِّقِينَ رُؤُوسَكُمْ وَمُقَصِّرِينَ So they thought that it was going to happen that year. But in fact, it did not happen that year. So the Prophet ﷺ told them, undo your ihram. And they didn't want to listen. Or they were not quick to respond. And the Prophet ﷺ got very worried. Because if they defy him as the Prophet, this is defying Allah. So he consulted who? Salama. He asked her opinion. What should I do? So his wife, Salama, said to him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, you do it first and they will follow. So he went in front of them and he undid his ihram. And at that point they despaired. They knew that's it. There's no chance. There's no chance because the Prophet ﷺ undid his ihram. So then they followed him after that. So he consulted them. He was merciful with them. He was down to earth and he let them express themselves. That's a little bit. There's a lot more to say about that. But I hope that helps. Wallahu alam.
What do you think?
I think we can end it there, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair for attending. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. And inshallah we'll see you guys next week. Bi-idhnillah. Assalamu alaikum.